It was late evening in Brooklyn, and the city buzzed faintly in the distance, muffled by the walls of Emily's cozy apartment. She had always loved the energy of New York, the way life thrummed through its veins day and night. But tonight, the hum felt different, more distant, more isolated. For the first time in a long while, Emily was alone. Her parents had left for a few days to visit family upstate, leaving her in charge of the apartment. At 21, she was used to independence, living in Brooklyn while attending college. Still, she had never spent an entire night alone in their place before. She tried to push the unease aside, reminding herself that she was safe inside the well-secured apartment. But as night fell, a strange tension crept into her mind. The first odd sound came around midnight, a faint tapping, almost imperceptible. Emily had just finished watching a movie on her laptop, curled up under a blanket on the couch when she heard it. Her breath caught, and she sat still, listening. It was coming from the window in the kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. She stood up slowly, her heart thudding in her chest as she moved cautiously towards the kitchen. The fire escape was just outside the window. Emily peeked through the curtains, but there was nothing there. No one. It's the wind, she told herself, even though the night was unnervingly still. She checked the lock on the window just to be safe and went back to the living room, trying to shake off the nervousness. She texted her best friend Lisa, jokingly telling her she was getting spooked by shadows. "Haha, you're fine. It's probably just a rat or something. Want to FaceTime?" Lisa replied. Emily smiled at the message, feeling a little better. She picked up her laptop and went to her bedroom, shutting the door behind her for extra comfort. But as she settled into bed and opened her laptop to call Lisa, the tapping sound returned, this time louder. Tap, tap, tap. Emily froze. The sound wasn't coming from the kitchen anymore. It was coming from her bedroom window. Her heart raced as she turned her head slowly towards the window that overlooked the alley. A shadow moved outside. Someone was standing on the fire escape. She scrambled off the bed, rushing to the window to check the locks. They were secure, but the figure outside wasn't going anywhere. A silhouette lingered just beyond the glass, barely visible in the dim streetlight. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she backed away. The figure tapped again, this time with deliberate slowness, as if taunting her. Emily grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called the police. As she explained the situation, she felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. The operator's calm voice did little to ease her panic. "Stay calm, ma'am. Units are on their way. Stay where you are and lock the door." Emily hung up and immediately bolted to the bedroom door, turning the lock. She backed away, her eyes never leaving the window. The shadow was still there, motionless now, watching. She couldn't see any features, just a dark outline. Minutes stretched into an eternity as she waited for the sound of sirens, but all she could hear was her own ragged breathing. Then, without warning, the figure moved. It slinked off the fire escape, vanishing into the night like smoke dissipating in the wind. Emily's knees felt weak as she collapsed onto her bed. It's over, she thought, but her relief was short-lived. Suddenly, the silence of the apartment was shattered by the unmistakable creak of the front door. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Hadn't she locked it? I did lock it, she thought. Her heart raced, the realization sinking in that someone, he, had managed to get inside. Panic surged through her as she heard slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the living room floor. She darted into the closet, closing the door softly behind her, pressing her ear against it. The footsteps stopped just outside her bedroom. The doorknob rattled. She covered her mouth with her hands to stifle her breathing, praying that the lock would hold. For a moment, the apartment was deathly quiet. Then she heard the faintest click, the sound of the door unlocking. Her blood turned to ice as the door creaked open. The intruder was inside. Emily crouched in the closet, her whole body trembling. She could hear him moving around the room, slow, methodical. Drawers opened, furniture was shifted, as though he was searching for something, or someone. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Lisa was calling her back, but Emily quickly silenced it, her thumb shaking as she pressed the button. The faint noise seemed deafening in the small enclosed space. The footsteps stopped. Emily's breath hitched. He had heard. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. She felt like she might pass out from the tension. The footsteps started again, heading towards the closet. She bit down hard on her lip to keep from making any sound. Emily's entire body tensed as the closet door slowly opened, and for a split second, she locked eyes with the man standing on the other side. His face was hidden in the shadows, but she could see enough to know that he wasn't just a burglar. He was something far worse. In a blind panic, she lunged forward, slamming the door into his face and bolting past him. She sprinted down the hallway, adrenaline pushing her faster than she thought possible. Behind her, the man recovered quickly, his footsteps thundering after her. Emily ran into the kitchen, fumbling for the back door. It was jammed. Her hands shook as she tried to twist the lock. The man's heavy breathing grew closer. In a final desperate move, she grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and turned to face him. But he wasn't there. The apartment was deathly quiet again, the only sound her own gasping breaths. She stood there, knife in hand, waiting, her back pressed against the counter. Minutes passed, but no one came. Had he left? Or was he hiding, waiting for her to make the next move? Suddenly, she heard the faint wail of police sirens approaching in the distance. Relief flooded her body, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The man could still be inside. When the police arrived, they stormed the apartment, clearing each room methodically. They found no one, but the evidence of his presence was undeniable. The lock on her front door had been picked, and her bedroom showed signs of a violent search. But the man himself was gone, vanished into the night. As they questioned her, Emily couldn't stop shaking. The police reassured her they would patrol the area, but deep down, she knew he had been there for her. This wasn't just a random break-in. He had been watching her, and somehow, she knew it wasn't over. As the police left, Emily sat alone in the apartment, her mind racing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. A single message appeared on the screen. "I'll be back." Her blood ran cold. Whoever he wasn't done with her yet. Chloe had never been afraid of being alone. At 20 years old, she was independent, smart, and self-sufficient. So when her parents announced they were heading out of town for the weekend to visit relatives, she wasn't worried. In fact, she was excited for a couple of quiet nights to herself in their spacious suburban home. Her parents left that Friday afternoon with cheerful waves and promises to call. Chloe waved back from the porch and then headed inside to enjoy her solitude. She had plans to binge-watch her favorite shows, maybe order some takeout, and just relax. That first evening was uneventful. Chloe made dinner, watched a movie, and lounged on the couch with her phone. By midnight, she felt the weight of sleep pulling her eyelids down. She locked the doors, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to her bedroom. But as she lay in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, something gnawed at the edge of her consciousness. A faint click echoed through the house. Her eyes snapped open, and her heart thudded. She listened intently, waiting to hear if the sound repeated, but everything remained still and silent. "It's just the house settling," she reassured herself. The next morning, Chloe awoke to the bright sun filtering through her curtains. She stretched, feeling slightly foolish for being spooked the night before. But as she wandered downstairs to the kitchen, she froze. The back door, the door she was certain she had locked, was slightly ajar. A cold chill ran down her spine. She cautiously approached it, peeking out into the backyard. Nothing seemed amiss. The wind, maybe? She closed the door, turning the lock firmly, and tried to brush off the unsettling feeling creeping into her mind. The day passed uneventfully, but Chloe couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. As night fell again, she found herself double-checking the locks on all the windows and doors. She laughed at herself, feeling ridiculous, but couldn't shake the growing knot of anxiety in her chest. That evening, as Chloe sat in the living room watching TV, the light in the hallway flickered. It was quick, barely noticeable, but her stomach twisted with dread. She stood up and went to investigate, but the light seemed fine. She reached for the switch, flipping it on and off. No flicker. "Get a grip, Chloe. You're just being paranoid," she scolded herself. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered like an unwanted shadow. Later that night, as she lay in bed trying to fall asleep, she heard it again, that faint click. It was closer this time, more distinct. She held her breath, listening, her pulse racing. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of floorboards creaking downstairs. Chloe sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Maybe it's the pipes or the wind, she thought, trying to rationalize the noise. but the creaking continued, as though someone was slowly walking through the house. Her mouth went dry. She grabbed her phone and opened the camera app, using the dim light of the screen to guide her as she crept out of bed. She tiptoed down the hall, each step measured and cautious. She paused at the top of the stairs, her eyes fixed on the darkened first floor. And then she saw it, a shadow moving across the window in the living room. Her breath caught in her throat. The shape was tall, human-like. Chloe's mind raced. No, it can't be. She backed away from the stairs, her heart hammering in her chest. Had someone broken in? Just as she reached her bedroom door, a loud thud echoed from downstairs. Chloe gasped, her hands trembling. Someone's in the house. She hurried into her room, shutting and locking the door behind her. She grabbed her phone with shaky fingers and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, steady. There's someone in my house, Chloe whispered, trying to keep her voice low. I think they broke in. Stay on the line. Help is on the way, the operator assured her. Suddenly, a new sound filled the air. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, climbing the stairs. Chloe's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, her breaths shallow and frantic. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside her door. She covered her mouth to stifle her breathing as the doorknob slowly turned. Chloe's heart felt like it would burst out of her chest. She could hear the faint sound of someone breathing just on the other side. The door didn't open, but she knew whoever it was, they were waiting. Chloe's mind raced. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit there. Carefully, she moved toward the closet and slipped inside, trying not to make a sound. She huddled in the corner, clutching her phone, still connected to the 911 operator. She had just enough signal to whisper into the phone. "He's outside my door." The operator's voice was calming. "Stay hidden, Chloe. The police are almost there." Suddenly, the door to her bedroom burst open with a loud crash. Chloe stifled a scream as she heard heavy footsteps entering the room. Her entire body tensed, barely able to breathe as she listened to the intruder search the room. The footsteps came closer, stopping right in front of the closet. Chloe's mind screamed for her to run, but her body was frozen in place. The doorknob rattled, and then, to her horror, it began to open. At that exact moment, the distant wail of police sirens filled the air. The footsteps retreated quickly, and Chloe heard the intruder bolt down the stairs and out the back door. Moments later, the house was flooded with the blue and red lights of police cars. Chloe staggered out of the closet, shaking uncontrollably, as officers stormed the house. One of them approached her, his expression gentle. "You're safe now. We've got him," he said. Chloe barely registered his words, her mind still spinning with terror. As the police led her outside, she saw them escorting her neighbor, Mr. Richardson, out of the house in handcuffs. The kind old man who lived next door, always so friendly, always smiling. Chloe's stomach churned with nausea. Later, the police told her that Mr. Richardson had been under investigation for years. He was suspected of several murders, all young women who had lived alone. They had never had enough evidence to arrest him. Until now. Chloe stood outside, watching as the police took him away. The weekend that was supposed to be a quiet retreat had turned into a nightmare. She shuddered, thinking about how close she had come to being his next victim. Even with Mr. Richardson in custody, Chloe knew she would never feel truly safe in her home again. The house was quiet, too quiet for Kate's liking. It was her first weekend alone in the sprawling suburban home, and while the prospect of having the place to herself had initially seemed appealing, now it only heightened her unease. Her family had gone away for the weekend, leaving her to tend to the house. It was just 2 nights, she had told herself, 2 peaceful nights of relaxation. But now, as the late autumn sun dipped below the horizon, shadows crept across the empty streets, and the quiet became oppressive. Kate had settled on the couch with a book, the soft hum of the living room lamp her only company. The occasional distant bark of a dog, or the faint sound of a passing car was the only reminder that she wasn't completely isolated. But then came the knock. At first, it was soft, barely audible. Kate furrowed her brow and glanced toward the front door, her heart skipping a beat. She sat still, straining her ears, but there was nothing. She brushed it off, probably just her imagination. But when the knock came again, a bit louder this time, she felt a chill run down her spine. Kate stood and walked to the door, her steps tentative. She peeked through the peephole, but the porch was empty, bathed only in the dull glow of the street lamp. She opened the door cautiously, expecting to see some neighborhood kids playing a prank, but there was no one. The quiet street was eerily deserted. With a shrug, she closed the door and locked it, dismissing the incident. But as she turned back to the living room, her phone buzzed, making her jump. It was a text from her mother, asking how she was doing. "Everything's fine," Kate replied, forcing herself to relax. She went back to her book, trying to shake off the lingering unease. But the peace didn't last long. Not even 15 minutes later, she heard it again. This time it wasn't a knock, but a soft thud from above, coming from the attic. Kate's heart thumped in her chest. The attic? It was probably just the house settling, she reasoned. Old houses creaked all the time. Still, something about the noise unnerved her. She tried to push it out of her mind and focused on her book, but her attention was broken when the television suddenly flicked on with a loud burst of static. Kate gasped, dropping her book. The remote sat untouched on the coffee table. She reached for it, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the TV off. The silence returned, but now it felt heavy, like the house itself was watching her. Kate chuckled nervously, convincing herself she was just being paranoid. The house was old. Maybe there was an electrical glitch, she told herself. But then the footsteps started. They were faint at first, coming from the floor above her, as though someone was pacing back and forth. Kate froze, her eyes wide as she looked up toward the ceiling. It couldn't be. She was alone. Or was she? Grabbing her phone, Kate dialed her parents' number, but after the first ring, she stopped herself. What was she going to say? That she was hearing things? They'd just tell her to calm down and stop letting her imagination get the best of her. She ended the call and stood there, listening. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, all was silent again. But then, something caught her eye, the coat rack by the front door. The jacket she had hung earlier was now draped across a chair. She hadn't moved it. She knew that. Suddenly, her skin prickled with the feeling of being watched. Slowly, Kate turned toward the large bay window at the front of the house. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the shadows just beyond the glass. But when she blinked, it was gone. Her pulse quickened. The rational part of her brain told her to stay calm, but something darker gnawed at her insides. Was someone messing with her? Or was there actually someone in the house? A sudden crash from upstairs made her heart lurch. Without thinking, she grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and hurried to the stairs. As she ascended, the floorboards creaked under her weight, and she felt every step like a countdown to something horrible. Reaching the second floor, she noticed her bedroom door slightly ajar. She knew she had closed it earlier. Slowly, she pushed the door open with the flashlight in her trembling hand, sweeping the beam across the room. Everything looked normal, except for the closet door, which was now wide open. Kate's breath caught in her throat. The closet door had been shut. With shaking hands, she approached it. The silence was deafening, the air thick with tension. She shone the light into the closet, nothing but clothes hanging neatly. But as she turned to leave, the faintest creak sounded behind her. Kate whirled around, shining the light back into the closet, but saw nothing. Her mind raced. Was someone hiding? Was she losing it? That's when she noticed something. A footprint. A large, muddy footprint on her bedroom floor. Her stomach dropped. Heart pounding, she backed away from the room, trying to stay calm. She had to get out of the house. Whoever was in here, she didn't want to stick around to find out. She bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. She reached for the front door, but before she could unlock it, the sound of a door creaking open behind her made her freeze. Someone was inside. There was no mistaking it now. Kate darted toward the kitchen, the back door her only escape. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate. Panic surged through her as she yanked open the back door and stumbled into the cold night air. She could hear them now, following her. Whoever it was, they were toying with her, letting her think she had a chance to escape. Kate sprinted into the backyard, heart pounding in her throat, but her legs felt sluggish. weighed down by fear. She ran to the garden shed, throwing herself inside and locking the door behind her. Darkness enveloped her, and the only sound was her ragged breathing. For a moment, everything was still, but then she heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps outside. They were getting closer. She covered her mouth, trying to stay quiet as tears streamed down her face. The footsteps stopped right outside the shed. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the thin wood of the shed door. Kate's entire body tensed. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a raspy voice. "I know you're in there." Kate's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the back wall, praying the door wouldn't open. The seconds felt like hours, her mind racing with terror. The door handle jiggled, but it didn't budge. There was silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, the door swung open. Kate screamed. The light from the house illuminated the figure, a man, tall and lean, with a sickening grin stretched across his face. He stepped inside, his shadow casting an ominous shape over her cowering figure. With a burst of adrenaline, Kate threw open the back window of the shed and scrambled out, her breath coming in gasps. She could hear him laughing behind her, mocking her fear as she bolted toward the neighbor's house. She pounded on the door, but no one answered. The house was dark. Desperate, she spotted her car in the driveway. She had left the keys inside. She ran back toward the house, not caring about the man who was surely still close behind her. She had to get those keys. She had to get out. Inside, Kate tore through the house, grabbing the keys from the kitchen counter. She heard footsteps behind her again. He was inside the house now. She could feel his presence, his breath on her neck, but she didn't turn around. Fumbling with the lock, she threw the front door open and darted to her car. Her hands shook so violently that she could barely get the key into the ignition. The man was almost at the front door now, his silhouette framed by the dim porch light. The engine roared to life, and Kate floored the gas pedal. The car sped down the quiet suburban street, leaving the house and the man behind. She didn't stop until she reached a well-lit gas station miles away, her entire body trembling with fear and exhaustion. Kate stared into the rearview mirror, expecting to see him behind her, but there was nothing, just the dark, empty road. She was safe, for now. But the memory of that night would haunt her forever.